Okay, so now we're recording, and we're working on getting these posted on the Equine Science Center website. So we will send everybody out an email and announce when they have been posted, because that way if you happen to miss the first webinar, or any other webinars for that matter that we've done over the years, you can see them on our Equine Science Center website. But I'm going to introduce myself quickly. I'm Dr. Carrie Williams. I'm the Equine Extension Specialist here at Rutgers University and the Associate Director for Extension with the Equine Science Center. So we haven't run a webinar in about a year. Things changed a little bit with the system we're using, so we're now using Adobe Connect, and I ran the first one 2 weeks ago, which I did, which was how human diet fads affect equine nutrition. And today I am very happy to welcome Dr. Frank Andrews. Dr. Frank Andrews gave a really nice presentation at the Mid-Atlantic Nutrition Conference last year, and I thought it would be really valuable for all of you to hear as well, so he accepted my invitation to give us a webinar. So just a little more about Dr. Andrews. He is a professor of equine medicine at the School of Veterinary Medicine at Louisiana State University. He is in the Veterinary Clinical Sciences Department, is both a diplomat with the American College of Veterinary Internal Medicine, and is trained, his residency was in equine medicine and surgery at Ohio State. He's won numerous awards for his work and his service, and has done quite a lot of research in multiple areas, but I think what he's known best for, on my end anyway, is the work he's done with equine gastric ulcer syndrome, and particularly today he's going to focus on the new advances in treating gastric ulcers in performance horses, or just really any exercising horse in general. So before I turn it over to Dr. Andrews, I want to mention two more things. First, if you haven't been onto our system, you will see on the far right-hand side under the participants area is a chat or chat box. And if you type in right here, during the presentation, I'm going to go ahead and moderate some of the questions that might come in. So if something comes up on one of the slides that needs clarification or you have a question on, go ahead and type it in the box. I'll politely interrupt Dr. Andrews and ask him your question before we get too far ahead in terms of the flow of the presentation. However, if you have an overall question that you feel can wait till the end, we're going to definitely have plenty of time for questions at the end. So you can hold your questions, or I will hold them until the end of the talk, and then I'll have Dr. Andrews field questions at the end. I do have one more thing I want to mention. There is a survey that I am typing into the chat box now. You can, right there in the chat box, you can go ahead and click on that link. You can do it either now or I'll remind you at the end, which is a survey on both the system that we used for the webinars, the webinar itself, and to give us any ideas for webinars that you might want to hear in the future. Because we're hoping to do at least 2 to 4 of these a year, and probably right around lunchtime. That seems to be like a better time for people than in the evening, which we used to do them also in the evening. So without further ado, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Andrews. But thank you for joining, everybody.
Thank you, Carrie, for the introduction. Can anybody hear me okay out there? I guess if you can't hear me, type into the chat deal, and we can hopefully get that taken care of. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about equine gastric ulcer syndrome and some of the new advancements in treatment and in the performance horse. So first of all, what is equine gastric ulcer syndrome? You're probably wondering how we came up with that term. Well, it's a term that we think describes ulcers in the non-glandular mucosa. I'll try to get this everything to work here in the non-glandular mucosa, and that's the area that, and we'll talk a little bit about the anatomy here shortly, but the horse has a kind of a two-tone stomach. It has a non-glandular portion, and then it has a glandular portion, which is this pink area, and that's where the acid secreted. And this non-glandular region is where the esophagus enters into the stomach. So that's something that we'll talk about in a little bit. And also we have ulcers in the pyloric region as it enters into the small intestine. These are polyps actually with ulcerations around them. And then we have ulcers in the end of the esophagus, and that's reflux of acid that comes up into the esophagus or the food tube, and this is called similar to people called GERDs, or gastroesophageal reflux disease. And this does occur in horses that are actively competing or racing. And so that gives us the sort of the background, but we have a lot of ulcerations that occur in a variety of different horses in different competitions. So we have the prevalence of ulcers. In other words, if we scoped 100 horses, what percentage of those horses would have ulcers? And in the herd animals that occur, the herd animals at the University of Connecticut right here, those horses have a very low prevalence. 11% of those horses have ulcers. So we scope 100 of those horses, only 11 of them would have non-glandular or gastric ulcers. And 40% of quarter horses competing will have gastric ulcers. And then if we look at the three-day event and hunter-jumper type horses, about 60% of those horses have ulcers. And then we get to the racehorse, about 93% of the racehorses have ulcers. And it's probably related to the intensity of exercise. And you can see as we move up into the racehorse, we get tremendous intensity of exercise in these horses. So here's the anatomy of the stomach. I always make a comment here that the anatomy is probably one of the predisposing factors for gastric ulcers in horses. So the stomach comprises two regions. It comprises a non-glandular region, and that's really an extension of the esophagus that occurs in the first third of the stomach. And if we look at the endoscopic view of the stomach, this is a big long tube that has a camera on the end, and we can actually see what's going on in the stomach. We see this non-glandular or white glistening mucosa, and it's separated here. We call this the cuticular ridge or the margo plicatus. And then the glandular mucosa, which is represented by this yellow area right here, this pink area on the endoscopic view. And the problem is that this non-glandular, this white glistening mucosa extension of the esophagus, is not very well protected from acid splashing up on this area. So it's like GERDs in people, gastroesophageal reflux disease, and that is similar to heartburn that we experience in ourselves. And we know that the cause of gastric ulcers is related to this anatomy, and also the availability of these aggressive factors, which are these aggressive factors, and they kind of overpower the defensive factors of the stomach. And in this non-glandular region of the stomach, the squamous mucosa, these ulcers occur because of acid and the volatile fatty acids, which are fermentation products of the sugar that we feed the horse. And again, there's a lot of bacteria in the stomach that would ferment the grains that we feed. If we feed a lot of these sugary grains, they'll ferment those grains and produce volatile fatty acids, and then bile acids that reflux back from the small intestine. And again, this is similar to GERDs or gastroesophageal reflux disease in people. Now the glandular mucosa, this pink area down here, that is related to impaired mucosal protection. Now in this region we have acid secretion, but there's a lot of mechanisms that help the horse heal once there's damage that occurs. It's more resistant to acid. It has a thick bicarbonate layer and a thick mucus layer, and that really helps the stomach regenerate in that glandular mucosa. And we really don't have bacteria that cause ulcers in the horses like we do in people. I think you've probably heard about Helicobacter pylori and those types of things that cause ulcers in people. We don't seem to have that type of bacteria in the horse, at least not that we've identified as of now. And why are we interested in gastric ulcers? What's the impact on our horses? Well, first of all, it can impair performance. So horses that are exercising will have, that have ulcers will perform at a lower level. And we obviously want our horses to really perform at that maximum level. And also it results in poor body condition. We can disrupt training, cause colic, and that's one of the things that we see, really mild colic. If it's severe colic, then those horses will likely have something else going on. And one of the things that when we see ulcers in the stomach, we wonder if that's the primary cause of colic, or whether there are other issues going on further on the digestive tract that could be related to disease that could be causing those ulcers to be secondary to the disease that the horse has. And also we worry about it, ulcerations in horses, because of the severe complications associated with ulceration. And that's when we get healing. Sometimes we get strictures as the healing has that kind of clamps down on that and on the ability of the horse to empty the stomach, and so then we get backflow of acid and complications associated with that, and that's really severe. Well, first of all, we know that hydrochloric acid causes ulcer, and in ulcers in horses, and that is because in a study that was done by Dr. Murray and Dr. Schuscher at Virginia Tech showed that when horses are intermittently fed, in other words, similar to the way we feed them. You know, we feed them basically in the morning and the evening, and so they have times where they don't have any feed. So this is on day 0, and as we intermittently feed them, then the horses will develop ulcerations after 48 hours, and then after 96 hours of bolus feeding, we call it, the horses will develop gastric ulcers. Now, you say, well, how do we know that acid is a problem there? Well, we have, in that study, he gave horses Zantac, and that's ranitidine. You can buy the Zantac 150 over the counter in your pharmacy, and that blocks the acid secretion in the stomach. And when they gave Zantac to the horses, then they didn't have any ulcers. They looked like this after the 96 hours. So it was able to prevent it. So we know that acid is a particular problem in horses in causing the ulcers. So we also know that grain feeding is an issue also. The stomach in horses has lots of different bacteria, and I'll show you how many bacteria are in there. We don't even have names for all of them. But we know that when sugary grains are fed, sweet feeds and things, now not necessarily at the level, but overfeeding grains, and one thing that people do when they feed is that they don't typically weigh out their grain. They just, one scoop, this is a 1 pound scoop, and in reality, if you actually weighed that scoop, it would be 2 or 3 pounds in that thing. So, and I noticed Carrie also made a comment. If you have any questions, certainly we can answer those questions as we go along. So when these grains are fermented, or the sugars in the grains are fermented by these resident bacteria that live in the stomach, these are actually bacteria that are growing on the surface of the non-glandular mucosa of the horse. And these bacteria can certainly be a problem when there's sugar around, because they like to ferment these sugars, and you can produce these volatile fatty acids, lactic acid, and alcohols, and that's again fermentation products in these horses. And then what happens is that these volatile fatty acids can absorb into the mucosa and damage the sodium transport and the viability of these cells, and then we can create an ulcer. And again, not every horse that's on a high-grain diet will develop ulcers, but we know that that's a risk factor by overfeeding grain. So what we recommend is, as you're feeding your horse grain, and most horses, you know, if you're in a lot of work, that horse, then really what we want to do is we want to feed the horse appropriately, but let's weigh the grain out. Keep just a bathroom scale in your barn and weigh out the grain so that you know exactly how much your horse is getting. If you're going to feed 5 pounds, then you want to be sure that you're giving 5 pounds and not 7 or 8 or 10 pounds to those horses. Now this is just a list. Dr. Rafat Al-Osmond out of Australia, he is near Brisbane there. Well, he's a microbiologist, so he took food material from horses that was found in the stomach, and he actually cultured the bacteria. So actually either streaked out a plate, or they measure these, they look at the bacteria by their DNA that's present in the bacteria. It's very sophisticated, and they were able to find all these bacteria in the stomach, and you know, Clostridium botulinum that causes botulism. There's all sorts of these bacteria, the streps and staphs and lactobacillus in the stomach. And so these bacteria, they tend to they ferment. They love in this acid environment. They love this grain, and so they'll ferment the sugars and produce these damaging VFAs in the stomach. So what management, you know, that's one of the things that we always talk about, is managing our horse so that these ulcers don't occur. So management, we want to reduce the stall confinement. That's not always possible, especially if you're in a boarding facility where your horse only gets out a couple times a day, maybe. And then try increase the frequency of pasture turnout. And these horses, of course, here look very satisfied out here in the pasture. Very nice in that. And then dietary modifications, reducing the periods of fasting. You know, free choice hay all the time. And this is a horse that had a stomach impaction, and you can see that this is a wedge of grain that the horse ate, and then the hay on either side. So horses they have this area, this wedge-shaped, pie-shaped area of grain, and that's right there in that non-glandular mucosa, and it's could produce those VFAs right there. And then one of the things, alfalfa hay. We have shown that alfalfa hay, when it's fed to horses, actually buffers the stomach contents, and it's actually an antacid for horses, and it can help reduce the possibility of ulceration in your horse, and it does by increasing the pH, or reducing the acidity in the stomach. So again, feeding a complete diet of alfalfa hay may or may not be the best thing for your horse. I would suggest you discuss it with your veterinarian or with your nutritionist to talk about whether alfalfa hay is the best. You can also mix it with your grass hay so that you can then have a combination of alfalfa hay and grass hay, and it still will have some benefit in reducing the ulcer risk in your horse. And then reducing the grain and concentrates, and again, not necessarily the actual volume, but certainly by weighing out your grains and concentrates, you will be able to reduce the amount just by sheer weighing, and that's going to reduce the economic burden. You know, again, reduce the amount that you buy, because one thing I find is when people start weighing out their grain, then they realize, man, I've been feeding a lot more than I should, And so then they get into that situation where they go, man, I'm saving money because I'm feeding my horse the correct amount and I'm saving money. And now I can do more, maybe buy more hay, and again, spend more money on preventative medicine, vaccines and things, so that I can prevent disease in my horse. And the current recommendations for treatment of gastric ulcers, and we always recommend that you use the FDA approved product for treatment of ulcers, and that's omeprazole, or the term Gastrogard. So Gastrogard, it's very expensive, but it's basically the best thing for treatment, and the dosage is 4 milligrams per kilo. It comes in a nice tube. It has the weight of your horse on there. You dial the weight using this marker, dial the weight 1,000 pounds, 1,250 pounds, and then go ahead and squirt it in the horse's mouth. It's very safe, and it is there is very efficacious for treatment of gastric ulcers. So we think that that is the best way to go. So I have we have a question here from Melanie, and I guess should I go ahead and answer that, Carrie? What do you think?
Yep, I was actually just going to jump in there. So yeah, you can answer it. She asked if the stomach empties while the horse is eating, right? So would hay after the grain help move the stomach contents out more quickly?
Okay, so yeah, that's very interesting. People have looked at feeding the hay first and then feeding the grain later, or feeding the hay, the grain first and then feeding the hay later. What's been recommended is to go ahead and feed the hay first and then feed the grain in behind that, and then that would help the stomach. Actually, that is, then the horse doesn't eat the grain as fast, and then it does filter down through and is emptied quicker. So, but either way, it doesn't really seem to make a big difference on stomach emptying. Really feeding the correct amount of grain is more important than when you feed it. And I know some people, if you have a horse that really bolts its grain or has fights with other horses, then feeding the hay first and then slowing down the horse's eating of that grain would be helpful. Some horses just, when you put the grain in there, they just want to eat it and they don't want anybody near them while they're eating. In that case, feed the hay first and then come back and feed the grain, and that way the horse will eat a little bit slower as far as the grain goes. But it doesn't seem to have an effect on whether the horse has ulcers or not, which one you feed first. So, or as far as gastric emptying goes. I hope that answers your question, Melanie. So you just have to kind of look at what your horse does the best. So, one of the things that I wanted to get, when I get back to omeprazole or Gastrogard, one of the things that we have noticed, and certainly when Gastrogard was approved, we noticed that there was a high rate of reoccurrence of ulcers once you stop treatment. So, and that's a big problem because, as you know, you want treatment to be effective, and it is very effective, but after you take the horse off that treatment, you want the horse to be ulcer-free. And so you can see that what has, in the approval process of Gastrogard, they did look at a preventative dose, which is half the dose. Actually a quarter of the dose once some other studies were done. So it's 1/4 of the tube, and that's the drug called the UlcerGard. So you probably have used UlcerGard in the past. UlcerGard is 1/4 the dose and is the preventative dose. So you start out with Gastrogard, you treat for 28 days, and then you come back and you use UlcerGard to treat that horse to prevent the ulcers from returning. And again, it's still a medication, and it's expensive. So what we want to try to do is look at management and also supplements to see if we can't minimize the use of pharmaceutical agents. There's a lot of different drugs out there, and this is usually what I show to veterinarians. and so that's one of the things that we look at is there's all sorts of different medications for treatment of ulcers. And if you look in people, the number one selling drug in drug class is anti-ulcer medications in the world because everybody has dyspepsia, so a lot of our horses do too. And we have Ashley. It looks like Ashley has a question. So is this something they have to take continuously? Okay, good question, and I assume you're talking about GastroGuard. So yes, and that's if you've ever been treated yourself for gastroesophageal reflux disease or GERDs, heartburn, once you get on these medications, you have to pretty much stay on them or you have terrible heartburn. And that's what is recommended when you are, your horse has ulcers, is to have continuous treatment with the ulcer guard. Now that's a big problem because that's not, it's not allowed in some competitions. So we want to try to get away from the medications and try to look at some supplements, and that's part of what our webinar is today, is to look at some of the research that's done on these supplements and see if there's something out there that we can treat with or feed our horses, and perhaps see if there's something that can prevent the ulcers from reoccurring. So what do we know about supplements? I'm sure if I could see everybody that's on this webinar, if I ask you how many feed supplements, I'm sure everybody would raise their hand. So I don't really have to ask that question. So we see, just going to the internet, I just pulled off a few of the supplements that are out there for gastric ulcers, and that, again, it includes a lot of different supplements, some of them maybe that you've used, but one of the ones that I thought was very interesting is this Faith. So it's ulcer prevention formula. So, and one of the things, because we have limited data on the effectiveness of these feed supplements and minerals for gastric ulcers, we also we're going on Faith. And so I thought this one was very adequate. So 522 Faith. So we're really going on Faith when we use these supplements, unless we have some data. So we really have limited data on the effectiveness. We do have some papers. I've one of my graduate students and a technician here at LSU, we've been looking at some of these supplements to see if there is some efficacy in the prevention of reoccurrence in ulcerations in horses. So in 2008 and 2012, we looked at the sea buckthorn berries and pulp, the Rutgers Equine, if you're familiar with that, and we also looked at some Pectin and lecithin in 2014, and we'll look at some of the studies in those two studies. So just to give you a little background, we did look at the effect of sea buckthorn extract. Now this is Rutgers Equine. The human product is called Sibu, S-I-B-U, and I do have a question down here. So Maggie's asking about papaya pulp. Unfortunately, I don't have any data on papaya pulp at this time, so we'll have to look at some of these other. That would be very interesting if Maggie could tell us what product has the papaya pulp in there. That might be of quite of interest for the whole group. So, but one of the things that you bring up papaya and this sea buckthorn berry, one of the things, these are berries or fruits, and fruits have a lot of antioxidants in them, and they have a lot of protective mechanisms, and so a high fruit diet and feeding these things may have an effect. So we looked at the effect of sea buckthorn extract on prevention and treatment of gastric ulcers in horses. And Rilla Reese, her father is owner of the Reese Mule Company, so she grew up with mules and horses, and she was a graduate student in the late 2000s at the University of Tennessee. So this is Rutgers Equine. Looks kind of like orange juice, but it's made out of these berries that are grown in Tibet at above 10,000 feet, so they're very stressed berries, so they put down a lot of antioxidants. And they have a lot of omegas, mega complexes, essential minerals, vitamins, and then these phenols, which are antioxidants and protective to the stomach. And one of the things in a study they did with people, it did protect or prevent gastric ulcers in people, and in one horse it did increase sperm motility. So it sounds like this is sort of it will cure everything, and a lot of these marketing slogans and things that are associated with these supplements really make you think, well, gee, it's going to cure everything, but in reality it may not. So we looked at the effects of this sea buckthorn extract, this sea buck equi, for treatment. And one of the things we didn't find at this graph over here to the right, when we look at, this is the control horses, and these are the treated horses, and basically we used 8 horses in a study, and we put them in stalls for 60 days, or actually 67 days, so we moved them from the pasture. We scoped them, we found that they had ulcers, and at day 0 the ulcers were no different in the control group when you compare that to the treated group, and then we fed them the sea buckthorn berry extract for 67 days, and then looked at gastric ulcer scores. And you can see here that the gastric ulcer scores between the treated group and the control group and the treated group, there was no difference in the ulcer scores in those horses when they were moved into the stalls and then fed. However, when we look down at the, just sort of dissecting out the data, during this 7-day period where we bolus fed the horses, we did find that the sea buckthorn berry treated horses, they did, 7 out of the 8 horses had either improved ulcer scores or their ulcer scores stayed the same. So again, that might be, it might have had some effect on gastric ulcers in this group of horses. So again, it might be effective at preventing the worsening of ulcers during stress when the horses are intermittently fed. So we did find some interesting data on that, but again, a little bit light there, but certainly we thought, well, maybe there's something. So then we wanted to look at another, this is also made by the same company, and it's called, Bruce McMullen, who is the owner of the company, he called me and he said, well, gee, we have a new formulation. It's stronger, and it has more of the sea buckthorn berries and pulp in it in a liquid emulsion. So could you try that on your study to see if there's any effects? So what we did is we then put the horses through a 5-week period where we put them in the stalls, and then we did notice that in that white glistening portion, that non-glandular mucosa, we saw no difference in the ulcer scores in these horses. And again, these are non-glandular number scores, and those horses really didn't have any change in the ulcer scores. However, when we looked at that pink area, the glandular mucosa, we did notice that the horses that were treated with the sea buckthorn, and this is called sea buck ultra, so the sea buck ultra had fewer ulcers. So this is a treatment group down here. They really protected them against the glandular ulcers that occurs in these horses. So again, a control group sort of had the increase in ulcer scores, whereas the horses that were on the treatment, the sea buck ultra, did not have any ulcerations in their glandular mucosa. So we did make a comment that perhaps that this sea buckthorn berry pulp and berries in a liquid emulsion did protect the glandular stomach, which is similar to the stomach that we have in these particular horses. So again, some evidence that glandular ulcers were protected. So we also wanted to look at pectin and lecithin. So if you wonder what pectin is, well, pectin is part of the apple, makes the apple rigid, so when you crunch into it, and it has some protective mechanisms. It's a coating agent in the stomach. And then also we looked at lecithin, which is also these coating agents that occur. So we had a company that came to us and asked us about about the pectin and lecithin, and this was called Egocin. So Egocin 250 and SLH. So these two products are available commercially, and you can see they come in a tub. And again, Egocin SLH and Egocin 250. So this is their treatment formulation. It's more concentrated, and this is their preventative formulation. So again, we wanted to see if these would prevent ulcers from occurring, in these horses. So we used, since there's 3 treatments, we have a control group, an Egocin SLH group, and an Egocin 250 group. We wanted to do a treatment and then put these horses through this bolus feeding and then treatment and feed deprivation, and then treatment. So they're going to be treated for a period of 5 weeks, as we did. And then we're going to scope the horses like we did in the other study to see if we can't prevent these horses from getting ulcers by using this Egocin 250 and Egocin SLH. So one thing we did notice that the horses were the ulcer scores were identically the same in this at the beginning, and then they stayed basically the same. Now we did treat one of the things we did find out when we moved the horses from the pasture, scoped them, and then moved them back in the stalls. Actually, the control group had fewer ulcers than the treated group after 21 days. So one of the things that we did make a comment regarding this particular situation is that perhaps moving a horse from a pasture where there's competition for feed and moving them into a stall where they don't have competition for feed may be helpful. So change of management. So if you have horses that have ulcers out in the pasture, and you move those horses into a stall, maybe that would be beneficial. Whereas if you have a horse that perhaps has ulcers in a stall and you move it out to pasture, maybe that would be better for the overall management of that horse. So then we noticed that there was really no difference in the ulcer scores after 28 days, but after 35 days, the Egocin 250 and SLH treated horses did have fewer ulcers after 30 days of treatment. So bottom line is that if you're going to use this particular supplement, you have to feed it for at least 35 days or 5 weeks to see that effect. So don't give up on a supplement just because you see no effect over this period of time. So again, we did see significant changes, and again, we think this is related to the pectin and lecithin that's coating that stomach and protecting it from ulceration. So then we had the SmartPak group, and I'm sure if I ask everybody here in the webinar if you use SmartPak, and I'm sure or familiar with SmartPak, everybody would be. So and certainly we know about SmartPak, so I had a call from the SmartPak people, and they said, would you do a study for us, and what do you think would be, what would you like to see in a SmartPak product? So I said, well, certainly sea buckthorn berries, and also pectin and lecithin in there. And they said, well, what about aloe vera and L-glutamine? And I said, well, yeah, those are, certainly would be interesting to put in there. So they made this Gastrovert, a proprietary blend of natural ingredients, and we wanted to see if this had an effect on preventing gastric ulcers after the treatment with omeprazole or Gastrogard. So we designed a study in which we basically for the first 14 days we put the horses on the CBUC. Now this is Smart Gut Ultra. So this is their product called Smart Gut Ultra, and then we had a control group. Now both these horses are on Gastrogard at the same time for 14 days, and then we take them off Gastrogard, and then we scope them day 28, day 35, and day 42, and we want to look at prevention of ulcers occurring after we stop the treatment with the Gastrogard. So again, they're treated with GastriGuard, and then we scope them after 14 days, treated with GastriGuard, scope them after 14 days, and then 28 days, and then 35 days, and then 42 days on the CBUC, the SmartGut Ultra. So we use a gastric ulcer scoring system to determine number and severity scores in these horses after we scope them. And one of the things we did notice is that all the ulcers were the same, and we chose the horses that had the most severe ulcers so that we could see if there was prevention. And then after 14 days on GastriGuard, the ulcer scores go way down below 0.5 on an average on those horses. And then we noticed that the treated horses here in gold, they actually, after GastriGuard was removed, that the treated horses had lower ulcer scores after 14 days off the GastriGuard than the horses that were treated. Now, these are the controls here in blue. I think it shows up as blue here. It's supposed to be purple and gold as it here at LSU. So, but you can notice that the ulcer scores were much higher in the control treated group compared to the SmartGut Ultra treated group. And then when we put them through the feed stress model, we did notice that gastric ulcers in the treated group did not go up as high, and then they were back down to their normal range, back down to the very low levels in day 42. So we did notice that there was a treatment effect after it, so there was a prevention effect in the horses that were treated with the SmartGut Ultra. And when you see the ads for SmartGut Ultra, you will see backed by research, and this is the research that we did for that particular company. So again, normal at the beginning, and then very low scores after GastriGuard treatment and the SmartGut Ultra treatment at the same time. And then the SmartGut Ultra horses, treated horses, their ulcer scores were much lower after removal of GastriGuard. This is 2 weeks after removal. And then we have, under the stress, feeding stress, the horses maintained a lower ulcer score, so there was a treatment effect with the SmartGut Ultra, and then, normal. And then one of the nice things about the use of this SmartGut Ultra is that it didn't alter the gastric juice pH in these horses. So it did have calcium carbonate in it, but when you give them GastriGuard, like here, you can see that the pH is increased very dramatically in the stomach. We don't know what the effect of that high gastric juice pH in there is due to. It does to digestion of proteins or digestion further on down the GI tract. So again, we have a more natural effect when we use this SmartGut Ultra supplement after we remove the GastriGuard. And then we don't have to use the GastriGuard to prevent ulcers from reoccurring. So basically we said that SmartGut Ultra supplement, and that's 40 grams twice daily, which is a recommended dose. It comes in the little pudding cups, or you can get a scoop. And again, you'll see it's backed by clinical research, which is the research we did here. Added to the feed prevents the worsening of gastric ulcers in this stall-confined model, so like most horses that are boarded after a omeprazole treatment without altering gastric juice pH. So again, it might be an affordable alternative to protect the non-glandular mucosa, this white glistening mucosa, which has very little protective mechanisms against the rebound acid effects after you discontinue your omeprazole treatment. However, what we do recommend is it should not be substituted for the FDA-approved product GastriGuard. So if your horse is diagnosed with gastric ulcers, we want to be sure that you're treated with the appropriate GastriGuard treatment. And then also you can put your horse on SmartGut Ultra, and then when the horse is taken off and the ulcers are healed, then there's those ulcers, at least in most of the horses, won't come back. There's certainly a possibility that ulcers could come back in some horses. So then we wanted to look at another product, and if you looked at the ingredients that are present in this Smart Gut Ultra, you'll notice that there's hydrolyzed collagen in there. So we worked with a company out of the Netherlands near Utrecht, and they had a product called that was a hydrolyzed collagen product, and they wanted us to also look at this after a meprazole treatment. And so we put the horses on this, and we did notice again after 56 days of treatment that the ulcers in the hydrolyzed collagen group here in blue were lower than in the control group. So we did notice that there was an effect, but again, you got to feed a long time, 56 days for these horses. And we also noticed that the gastric juice pH remained the same. However, it did enhance the pH and made that pH higher in the Gastrogard treated horses. So if you use it while you're treating with Gastrogard, it could enhance the effect of the Gastrogard. Now, we did notice that the ulcer scores in the hydrolyzed collagen treated horses were lower in the Gastrogard treated horses when we compare those to the untreated controls. However, there was no significant difference here, although it does look like there might be if we maybe had more horses in our study. So again, hydrolyzed collagen, it's in the Smart Gut Ultra, but you can also use it by itself, seems to have some effect. And then we also looked at Alphalocks forage. For those of you who don't know about Alphalocks forage, it's a product that's made by Triple Crown. It's a alfalfa-based forage that consists of a variety of different, here's the ingredients over here. It has chopped alfalfa hay, manna oligosaccharides, it has protective omegas, L-carnitine, which again you saw in Smart Gut Ultra, and then it has some crude protein, and the thing I'm most interested in is non-structural carbohydrates, because we don't want that to be above 10%, because that could lead to fermentation in the stomach. And also, if we have insulin-resistant horses, that could be a particular problem too. So one thing we did notice in this Alphalocks forage is we wanted to look at to see if it prevented ulcers from occurring in the stomach. So again, because it has the alfalfa hay in it, or at least the forage part of it, we thought this may be a way to protect the stomach by feeding this Alphalocks forage. We did notice no changes in the ulcer scores in these horses, so there was no treatment effect. And so we basically, said that there's no effect. However, we did measure insulin levels in these horses, and we did notice that when the horses were fasted, that here's the insulin levels during fasting, and this is the horses under control, and this is the horses when they're fed the Alphalocks. We did notice that the insulin levels increased dramatically in the horses that were fed the Alphalocks, and their glucose levels stayed the same. So what this meant to us is that we had a better absorption of glucose from the small intestine in the Alphalocks fed horses. So it was better at absorbing the sugars in the grain, and so now we have less sugar going back to the large intestine, and which could cause fermentation and problems with colic. So we do see a better absorption, and one thing that is noticed by people who feed the Alphalocks is that their horses seem to have more energy, and that's because probably they're better at absorbing the sugar. So the big thing is it did not prevent the reoccurrence of ulcers after discontinuation of omeprazole. So the number and severity of ulcers were reduced, but they did not meet significance. So we don't think it's a good forage. This Alphalocks forage is good for treating ulcers, or at least when we treat ulcers, in preventing the reoccurrence. But we did notice that blood insulin levels are higher, and so it may have a beneficial effect on the digestive tract in reducing the amount of sugars that go into the hindgut and reduce the amount of fermentation or the gas colics that we see in our horses. And I guess Maggie, she did tell us that the papaya treatment is called a natural plan stomach soother. So that would be interesting to see, how that comes out in the planned stomach soother. So, but again, these fruits and berries are very big now as far as the antioxidant concentrations and their ability to protect the stomach against that damaging acid. So then, after we looked at several of these fruits and berries, then we wanted to look at zinc. And for those of you who are not familiar with Zinpro, they make a performance mineral. It contains zinc, manganese, copper, and cobalt. And so we wanted to look at the zinc performance minerals and to see if we couldn't prevent ulcers from occurring in this. And we were primarily interested in zinc in this because zinc is very important in wound healing. And we think that so just some data on the supplements. We don't really have a lot of zinc supplement data on ulcers, but it's important in maintaining mucosal integrity. So it's great at sort of protecting the mucosa and allowing it to heal after it's damaged. There's some zinc creams out there that you can put on wounds, and it does improve the healing of these wounds. And we think it also improves the intestinal and skin integrity when you feed zinc and manganese in the diet. Improved healing of gastric ulcers in people taking zinc supplements. And then previous studies in horses show improvement in ulcer scores in yearling horses after 60 days of feeding. So again, we have some information about zinc and manganese and some of these other minerals in horses. And just to give you a little background, zinc is an essential coenzyme, so it reacts with vitamin E, or to release vitamin E from the liver storages. And again, vitamin A, not vitamin E, but vitamin A is important to protect the skin and wounds from free radical that might continue to damage the skin, and it increases our ability to heal wounds by the presence of zinc. Also, zinc sulfate, and then is the inorganic zinc, and then the zinc methionine, which is a chelated zinc combined to these amino acids. And so these have been supplemented in horse diets, and it helps the zinc when it's bound to the methionine, or this chelated zinc, helps the zinc to be absorbed better through the GI tract. And there has been some work done in pigs that it protects the zinc is essential for normal intestinal barrier protection. And when pigs are stressed, when they're weaned, when you give them zinc, it really helps the mucosa, the intestines, to prevent intestinal permeability when during heat stress and during stress of weaning in pigs. So that's very helpful, and so we thought maybe we would see some effect in horses. So we looked at Zinpro Performance Minerals, and we actually mixed that with, at the recommended dose, mixed that with our basically a grain, the oats, so a crimped oat, and we wanted to make sure that we had just a basic grain, so we didn't have a lot of pre-made grains, and we wanted to see if this supplementation would prevent gastric ulcers from reoccurring, and again, after stall confinement and then feeding the omeprazole. So again, in these horses, prevent the reoccurrence of ulcers in these horses. And again, we did initial gastroscopy. We did a 2-period crossover. We had our treatment period, initial gastroscopy. We had our treatment period on day 0, and then we had 14. We did gastroscopy on 14, 42, 49, and 56 days in 18 horses per period. And we didn't do a crossover study in this, but we had 36 horses total, so 2 times 8, 18 horses. So a pretty robust study in this particular study. And we had the students. That's one of the good things about students. They love to mix feed in the crimped oats, and so they'll mix it up, and then we'll treat the supplements, weighed out daily, and then mixed with the feed and in the crimped oats, and fed their daily allotment, split in the AM and PM feeding. And this is our research barn where we feed our horses. You can see they're very curious and they like their grain feeding. So we did some statistical analysis to evaluate the data in this particular study, so we started looking at the effects of this, and during the first period, we looked at the ulcer scores. Again, there was no difference at day 0, and then really no difference throughout this period 1. Now, one of the problems during this particular period is that we didn't really have the very good nutritional plane in the horses. A lot of horses lost weight during this time, and it was early in the winter, and our hay was pretty poor quality. So we think that the horses during this period didn't really incorporate the grain into healing in the stomach. However, when we looked at the second group of horses, we did see an effect of the zinc in protecting the stomach after the treatment with GastriGuard, and that was throughout the whole study. We did see a pretty significant effect of the zinc treated here in the gold. So kind of interesting. Again, we think maybe the plane of nutrition was a little better during this second period, and you need a good nutritional plane for zinc to be effective in these other minerals. We also noticed that during in Louisiana we have high humidity and high temperature. During the first period, our temperature was much lower in the horses, and then when we get into the summer. So it could be that zinc might be protect the horses during the real heat and humidity period of the when the horses are stressed. It might actually incorporate much quicker into healing of those ulcers, or protecting the stomach from because of metabolic rates much higher. So, and again, we thought maybe heat stress in other species. This is zinc will protect the horse while the horse is being stressed during heat. And it could be that if these zinc molecules and these manganese molecules, copper and things, may be better when there's a high metabolic rate in these stressful times. So the results and conclusions of that study, again, we did see that zinc performance minerals resulted in less severe gastric ulcers during period 2 of the study. And again, during period 1, it was difficult to keep weight on the horses due to poor quality hay, and it's really in that early winter part, it was difficult to find good hay for these horses. And we also saw an increase in the ambient temperature and environmental temperature during the second period, which could mean that there was higher metabolism and better zinc metabolism and healing that was occurred during that second period. So we think that this zinc performance mineral supplement at levels used in this study in these horses may be beneficial in reducing gastric ulcer severity and maintaining gastric health after omeprazole treatment. Now you wonder, now these are chelated minerals, in other words they're attached to an amino acid, so we think that that allows absorption better. And if you think about it, there are some feeds, the Nutritional feeds, the Triple Crown feeds, they all have the performance minerals in there, and so feeding a grain that has the performance minerals might help you in reducing your risk of gastric ulcers in horses. So we kind of have looked at a lot of supplements and some of the reasons for ulcers in the horses and some of the clinical signs that we might see and the impact in horses. So what are the recommendations, kind of the take-home message for gastric ulcers in horses or prevention? So provide good quality hay throughout the day and night. So again, keeping your horse constantly eating. The horse was made to walk around in the pasture, graze all the time, keep its stomach full, and buffer the stomach contents from that acid production. And horses are continual acid secretors, so they don't really have to have feed available to continually secrete acid. And that could be because they were adapted to constantly digesting feed because they're pasture grazers. So they always have feed available. Feed alfalfa hay or mix the alfalfa hay with your feed or feed it alone. And again, some people, if you're from California, you probably have heard about enteroliths, or these stones that occur because alfalfa hay has a lot of calcium in it, or the soils in California have a lot of calcium. So again, in those areas where alfalfa hay has some risk of other diseases, you'll want to at least mix that with your grass hay rather than feeding it alone. We also want to limit the starch in the diet so that we have less than 5 pounds of grain every 6 hours. Now this is what we're talking about when we talk about this is sweet feed. So this would be something like omeline that has a lot of non-structural carbohydrates in it. So you want to feed, you probably could feed more if you fed like the Safe Choice, the lower grain feeds. So, and then we also recommend, and weighing your feed is always, keep a bathroom scale in the barn, weigh your feeds, because I guarantee you're going to decrease the amount of money you're going to spend on your grain, because 5 pounds of grain, if you weigh it, then you know the horse is getting 5 pounds, and you're going to find out that 5 pounds of grain is not that much. You've probably been overfeeding your horse. So now also we want to recommend that you feed grains that have chelated minerals that contain zinc methionine or other chelated minerals in them. That may help. And then adding corn oil to the diet. If you're having, maybe your horse is on, has ulcer risk and you have it on these feeds, but you don't quite have enough energy in your horse, then adding corn oil to the diet may increase the energy level in that horse. There's a lot of energy in corn oil, and it's very satisfying to the horse. Also, if you have ulcers in your horse, then are diagnosed by your veterinarian, then giving GastroGuard for the initial treatment is what we recommend in these horses. And then during the GastroGuard treatment, we recommend that you add SmartGut Ultra to the treatment. Mix it with the feed during and after GastroGuard treatment, and it could prevent the rebound hyperacidity and the rebound ulceration that occurs after discontinuing omeprazole treatment. And really, you should have your horse endoscoped before and after you finish treatment to be sure that the ulcers are gone. And then we want to monitor our horses for behavior and signs of reoccurrence of these ulcers, because even in the best management situation and in the best supplement treatment with the SmartGut Ultra, we're going to have some horses that don't respond to the treatments. So I wanted to acknowledge the group that we have working here at LSU. We have a lot of technical help here, and so I wanted to acknowledge Dr. Josh Cartmill, who's right here. He's has a PhD in reproductive physiology and also helps us with the gastroscopies. Frank Garza, who runs our pH meter technician. Mike Cowan, who's a research manager, and then our veterinary technicians and veterinary students, and of course all the horses of the Equine Health Studies program, because without the horses, of course, we couldn't do any of these studies that we do to help your horse. So we have about 90 horses in our herd, and they've all been scoped a lot of times. They really do very well, and they are under the direct supervision of veterinarians and of the Institute of Animal Care and Use, the IACUC. So they all have IACUC approval, every study that we do. And of course, the funding sources, I would be remiss if I didn't show the funding sources: the Louisiana State University Equine Health Studies Program, the CBUC Equine LLC, which is a Cebu company, LSU Foundation, Centaur, which makes the Egason product, SmartPak Equine, which funded us for the Smart Gut Ultra study, the Zinpro Corporation for the Zinpro Performance Minerals, and then Darling Ingredients, which makes the hydrolyzed collagen product. And I'd also like to tell you that we have a new paper out that's Nutritional Management of Gastric Ulcers in Horses, which was just published in the Equine Veterinary Education, will be in the January issue, and it can give you a lot of information about what we talked about today. And I'd like to finally thank Carrie for putting on this webinar and all the guests that were here. And you probably didn't know that Darth Vader was Darth Veterinarian before he became Darth Vader, or maybe after, and he does feel the disturbance in the horses. So thank you very much, Carrie.
Frank, that was great. Thank you so much. Now, I did hold off a couple questions at the very end so that you could, keep going, and I will go back and ask you a couple of those if you don't mind. We can do so briefly before our time gets cut off. But Gail asked if you had any thoughts or know anything about chia seeds, CHIA, seeds for ulcer and colic prevention.
Right. Well, unfortunately, I don't have any direct experience with chia seeds. I know they're fairly high in antioxidants, I believe, and it could be that they have similar effects to some of these other products. But there hasn't been a lot of work done on that particular product that I know of.
Okay. And then Maggie asked again if any studies besides nutritional studies have been done to how stress manipulates ulcers in horses.
Well, yeah, actually there's been mostly the stresses that have been put on horses are related to exercise, which is definitely a stress, and we think of exercise as a good thing, but it is a good thing, but unfortunately, as the horses are exercising, there is, especially when the stomach's empty, there could be splashing of acid up on this non-glandular mucosa that could potentially cause ulcers. That's why we recommend that you don't fast your horse a prolonged period of time before competition, and usually it's recommended 2 to 4 hours prior to competition rather than the 6 to 8 to 12 hours that's been recommended in the past. And then if you're on an endurance ride, certainly water, good clean water, and feeding the horse supplements or feeding the horse during the endurance ride. And then certainly feeding horses after competition is very important so that they maintain a full stomach, and don't have a lot of acid present in the stomach. And then, of course, feeding stress, intermittently feeding horses, not providing hay all around the clock. It can be a stress. And then, of course, the stresses of housing in a stall when the horse is used to being out. Also the stresses of being shipped long periods of time in trailers. And I know a lot of people go to a lot of different shows, so try to minimizing the stress on that. Social grouping is one big stress that horses go through. What you want to try to find in a boarding facility if your horse is turned out is try to find a group of horses that get along, that are familiar with each other, so that they're not, different horses aren't turned out in the same pasture, so they always have to reestablish a pecking order. So that's a good way to minimize the stress in our horses. And then changing the environment, moving a horse from Louisiana to Minnesota in the winter. There's a huge jump in the weather, and vice versa, moving a horse from Minnesota down to the heat and humidity of Louisiana, Florida. is difficult too for them to adjust. So there's a lot of different stresses. Some horses deal with stress more than others, just like people. So you have to kind of feel what your horse how it deals with stress in those situations, and try to deal with it appropriately.
Great. I think we'll end with one last question that's been up here for a little while. Melanie said that the process for scoping requires fasting, and some of her clients are worried that that will cause ulcers itself. Do you have any recommendations there?
Well, what we've tried to do is minimize the fasting in the horses. So usually 6 to 8 hours of fasting. So what we typically do is we'll have the client give the last feeding at 8 to 10 in the evening, and then what we'll do is give a little bit of grain, just get that stomach to empty, and then not feed the horse until we scope the horse at 8 a.m. in the morning. So you're looking at about 8 to 10 hours of fasting, and then we get the horse on feed right afterwards, and that really minimizes the stress on that particular horse. Because most horses, it's been shown that most horses from about 1 a.m. to about 6 a.m. don't eat a lot. Most of them just sleep and don't eat a lot. That's one of the things that we have noticed in horses. So if you minimize the fasting, we don't want to fast them for 24 to 48 hours. That can really be a stress. But 8 to 10 hours is pretty reasonable.
Great. Well, the questions are great. Everything was really great. I want everybody to thank Dr. Andrews, and I thank you as well. It would be really helpful, and I'm going to post the link one more time up on our little chat area. If everybody can just take a few minutes right now and go on the SurveyMonkey survey, it might only take you 3 or 4 minutes to fill it out for us for any future webinars. But I'm going to go ahead and shut off the recording.